Hi everyone. This week we're going to be talking about creating good content. We have a lot of readings and videos and tutorials queued up to help with all different kinds of content that you might be working with. But I wanted to start with this kind of high-level video, both to give you some general guidelines to think about and also to help position you to understand all the rest of the content that we have laid out for this week. So as far as you creating an influencer account, in terms of creating good content, you want to think about what kind of media are you using. Most of you seem to have settled on one of three major types, either text, photos, or videos. The guidelines that we're going to have for photos will apply very much to videos in terms of composition, editing. The tools may be a little bit different, and of course you need to think about things like pacing and storytelling with videos, which we'll actually talk about in the text section here. But for a lot of the lessons this week, we'll group photo and video together. So if we're talking about text, if you're doing a blog, if you're going to have a social media account where the text that you're sharing is the most important part, there's kind of three main ways that I think about the content that you might share. And of course there may be more, you may have combinations of these things, but generally we would break this into storytelling, jokes, or information. So if you're doing storytelling, you want to make sure that you're thinking about how do you have an actual story. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So these aren't just sort of one-off, here's a thing that happened, but you really want to make sure if you're trying to be an influencer in this space of storytelling, that you've got good narrative, that you're introducing characters, that you have an arc of the story, that you're actually telling people something that follows that structure, beginning, middle, and end. That can be done in a tweet, that can be done in one sentence. Of course, the classic example of how to tell a story really fast is this 6-word story attributed to Ernest Hemingway, though who knows if he actually wrote it, for sale, baby shoes never worn. It's even a little bit of a stereotype at this point, but the point here is not that you should be telling stories like this, but rather with a few words, you have a story that has a beginning and a middle and an end implied from it. You understand who the characters are, that there are parents, that they bought these shoes, that they're not able to use them, that there's a tragedy involved in this. And so with very little text, you can still create stories that have a lot of texture. Now, if you want to have longer text, of course, that's great. A great example of this is Humans of New York. You're probably familiar with that if you're in this class, but if you're not, or if you just want to go back to it, I've provided a link to that in the course materials for this week. These are, of course, strongly visual. It's a photographer who creates them, but the really compelling part that makes those photos so interesting is that the captions are really incredible storytelling that have a great beginning, middle, and end and narrative arc. And so you want to think about how do you actually tell that story if that's the kind of thing that you're going to use. Every post doesn't need to go that way. So I would say, in my running account, I'm telling stories sometimes over the course of several weeks about something that I'm doing. Sometimes I'll be doing a race, and over the course of the day I'll construct a series of posts that sort of naturally has that story. I have started a race, here's stuff that I'm seeing in the middle, here's how I'm feeling. It's always pretty crappy by the end, and then I finish and am sort of having a little celebration, or if it goes bad, kind of bemoaning what happened. And so it's not that you need to necessarily construct a fully formed story all at once, but you want to think about how to do that in a way that's going to be engaging. A classic example of how to do that poorly is on cooking blogs. So if you've ever gone online looking for recipes and you come across cooking blogs, the most common complaint is that you have to scroll through so much nonsense to actually get to the recipe at the bottom. And it's a lot of rambling. Whoever's writing the blog talking about whatever the childhood vacation they took somewhere and how it reminds them of the basil that they put on the spaghetti. But there's not a great story, it's just a little reflection. The reason you see that so much on cooking blogs is actually for search engine optimization or SEO reasons. If you have a page that's really short that doesn't have a lot of text, it's not ranked as high in the Google search results. And so all that rambling and stories before you get to the recipe are there to make sure that people spend time scrolling your page and that it has a high word count so it shows up higher in the search results. So that's why they do that. They tend to do a poor job with the storytelling as a general rule, because they're really generating filler. The point is that they've got this nice recipe, and instead they're putting a bunch of other text just to do what the search engines expect. So that said, if you have a cooking blog, you can put, of course, whatever you want up on the top, but focusing on something that's going to be engaging is good. And if you're just doing it for search engines, providing a link to get people down to the stuff they want, maybe even better. Okay, so that's just a quick overview about storytelling. Again, there's going to be some links into how to do that in an effective way in the course materials. Jokes are the next thing. Obviously, these should be shorter. They certainly can have a storytelling element, but they don't necessarily have to. Here you're looking for short, punchy, gives people something unexpected. There's a ton of great advice on how to write good jokes. And again, I've put some readings about that from masterclass activities in the description of the course materials for this week. And then finally, you might be providing information. So that could be something from an advocacy position if you're putting yourself out as an expert. And that doesn't have to have the same kind of storytelling arc. Obviously, certainly doesn't have to be funny. But some general guidelines for any of these types of text is one that you want to keep it short. Unless you're really working on, essays that will become part of a book. If you're on social media, people do not want to spend a ton of time reading, so short is better. If you're working on a platform like Twitter, you're going to necessarily be constrained in your word count. If you're using your words really effectively on a platform like Instagram and Facebook, you have more space, but you want to make sure that you're not just rambling there if you want to keep people engaged. Number two, regardless of which of these things you're doing, you want to be authentic. Authenticity, is a hard thing to measure, but it's something that people really value. And if you sound like, something generated by a corporate speak bot, or that you're intentionally putting on a voice that's not really your own, people are going to notice, and it's going to make your text content less engaging. And then number three is that you want to give the audience something surprising, interesting, useful, unexpected. And a personal thing that I'll add on to that as someone who does a lot of content creation like this is that you want it to be something that's easy for people to remember. So when I'm talking about, say, privacy and big data and social media on my professional account, and even when I'm out in person, on stage talking about those examples, I collect stories that certainly have a narrative arc and are interesting, that have a very surprising ending, but that also are easy for people to remember, so they can, I like to say, if they're going out to drinks with people and they want to tell them a story about what they saw at their conference, pulling out one of the examples that I gave is something that is easy for them to do. And even if they don't remember the numbers exactly right, that they can tell this really interesting story about how data from this one place was analyzed and revealed this totally unexpected insight. So if you're just repeating stuff that people have seen already, you're not going to become influential because no one's getting anything new from you. So surprising, unexpected, really useful, really interesting, those are the things that you want to spend your time collecting, curating, pulling them from other places, thinking about how to take little nuggets that you have found and turn them into that. In terms of text content, that is really going to be the thing that takes you to that level where people are going to want to follow you to find new things that they can share with others. If you're doing photos and certainly videos, all of those guidelines sort of apply in one way or another. People certainly want to see things that they haven't seen before. They want it to be interesting, surprising, useful, stuff that they want to share. But there's this added visual element to that. So good visual composition is really important. I have a tutorial on sort of the fundamentals of good composition of photos if you haven't done any of that before. And even if you know sort of the basics, going through some of those things, some of those tutorials are likely to be really helpful. And then well edited. We are fortunate to have access to tons of great photo and video editing software, including some really professional level stuff that the university provides for us. Taking those extra, 2 or 3 or even 5 minutes to edit a photo, to adjust the lighting, the cropping, the optics, to just make it that extra bit better is something that really is going to take you on social media to that next step where people are going to want to share. So this week I have a video of me editing a picture of a chicken that I took in Key West. It's just a chicken, and the photo that we end up with is pretty much the same as the one that we started with. I haven't, photoshopped in anything that wasn't there. I've just kind of adjusted the optics, cropped it, made the color and lighting better, but it makes it a really striking, beautiful picture after the edits, where it's a perfectly fine and kind of funny snapshot before. So getting your visual content to the level where someone wants to share it because the visuals are so striking is a really important part of creating viral, influential photo and video content on social media. So that's it, some very high level guidelines for creating good content. For text, you want to be short, you want to have it be surprising, interesting, engaging, punchy. If you're doing visual content, think about how all those lessons from text might apply, and then also be really careful and attentive to good composition and editing to make things inspiring. With that, we're going to get into much more specific advice with the individual lessons in the material this week, but hopefully this positions you to get how those fit together a little bit better.